The rain was coming down in sheets as I stared out the window of my studio apartment in Chicago. 46 years old, a freelance graphic designer and utterly, devastatingly alone. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Not after 20 years with Bronwyn. 20 years of what I thought was a loving, committed marriage. I met Bronwyn at a gallery opening in River North. I was immediately drawn to her vibrant energy, her infectious laugh, and her fiery red hair. She was an artist, a painter with a bold, unapologetic style. We were two creative souls colliding, and it felt like destiny. We married 2 years later in a small ceremony overlooking Lake Michigan. It was a perfect day, filled with love, laughter, and the promise of a future together. For years, things were good. Really good. We built a life together in Lincoln Park, a cozy brownstone filled with art, books, and the comforting aroma of Bronwyn's baking. We traveled, explored new restaurants, and supported each other's careers. I loved her fiercely, unconditionally. I was proud of her talent, her ambition, and her unwavering spirit. I believed with every fiber of my being that we were in this for the long haul. Then, about a year ago, things started to shift. Subtle changes at first, almost imperceptible. Bronwyn started working longer hours at her studio, claiming she was preparing for a major exhibition. She became distant, less affectionate. Our conversations dwindled, replaced by strained silences. She started taking her phone everywhere, even to the bathroom, and would snap it shut if I entered the room. I noticed she changed her passwords on her phone and laptop. I tried to brush it off, attributing it to stress and the demands of her career. But a nagging doubt began to creep into my mind, a seed of suspicion that threatened to take root. One evening, I decided to surprise Bronwyn at her studio. I knew she had been working late, and I wanted to bring her dinner and offer her some company. I drove to her studio in Wicker Park, a converted warehouse space she shared with several other artists. The building was dimly lit, and the only sound was the hum of the ventilation system. I walked down the long corridor to her studio, the knot of anxiety in my stomach tightening with each step. As I approached her door, I heard voices. Bronwyn's voice, and another, deeper voice I didn't recognize. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the doorknob. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was probably just another artist stopping by to chat. But the doubt was too strong, the suspicion too deeply ingrained. I slowly turned the knob and pushed the door open. The scene that unfolded before me shattered my world into a million pieces. Bronwyn was standing in the middle of the studio, locked in a passionate embrace with a man I had never seen before. His hands were tangled in her hair, and her body was pressed tightly against his. The air was thick with the scent of paint and something else, something acrid and bitter that burned in my nostrils. Betrayal. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. The blood drained from my face, and my heart pounded in my chest like a drum. I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. I just stood there, frozen in the doorway, staring at the woman I loved as she kissed another man. Bronwyn pulled away from the man, her eyes widening in horror as she saw me. Her face flushed crimson, and she stammered, "Torin, it's not what you think, not what I think." I managed to choke out, my voice trembling with rage and disbelief. "I'm standing here watching you make out with some stranger in your studio. What am I supposed to think?" The man stepped forward, his expression a mixture of guilt and defiance. He was tall and muscular, with dark hair and piercing blue eyes. He looked like he belonged on a construction site rather than an artist's studio. "Look, man, I can explain," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Explain. Explain what? Explain how you're screwing my wife," I roared, my voice echoing through the studio. Bronwyn burst into tears, her body shaking with sobs. "Torin, please, let me explain. It just happened. It was a mistake. A mistake. A mistake that involved you wrapping your arms around another man and kissing him like you haven't kissed me in months." I retorted, the pain in my voice cutting through the air. I didn't wait for her answer. I turned and stormed out of the studio, slamming the door behind me. I ran to my car, my vision blurred by tears. I started the engine and sped away, the image of Bronwyn and the stranger seared into my mind. I drove aimlessly through the streets of Chicago, the rain mirroring the storm raging inside me. I couldn't comprehend what had just happened. How could the woman I loved, the woman I had dedicated my life to, betray me in such a callous and devastating way? I spent the next few days in a daze, barely eating or sleeping. I replayed the scene in my mind over and over again, each time feeling the pain and betrayal more acutely. Bronwyn called repeatedly, leaving desperate messages on my voicemail, begging me to talk to her. I ignored them all. I couldn't bear to hear her voice, to listen to her lies. Finally, after 3 days of agonizing silence, I decided to confront her. I drove back to our brownstone in Lincoln Park, the place that had once been our sanctuary, now a monument to our shattered dreams. Bronwyn was waiting for me, her face pale and drawn. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying. "Torin, please, just listen to me," she pleaded, her voice hoarse. "I'm listening," I said coldly, my arms crossed. "But I don't want to hear any more lies." Bronwyn took a deep breath and began to speak, her voice trembling. She told me that she had been feeling neglected and unappreciated in our marriage, that she felt like I was more focused on my work than on her, that she had been craving attention and excitement and that she had found it in the arms of another man. "His name is Callum," she confessed, her eyes darting away from mine. "He's a sculptor. We met at the studio. It just happened, Torin. I swear it didn't mean anything." "Mean anything?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You slept with another man, Bronwyn. How can you say it didn't mean anything?" I know," she sobbed. "I'm so sorry, Torin. I made a mistake. Please, can't you forgive me? Forgive her. After she had destroyed everything we had built together. After she had shattered my trust and broken my heart into a million pieces." I looked at her, really looked at her, and I realized that I didn't recognize her anymore. The woman I loved, the woman I had married, was gone, replaced by a stranger who was capable of such deceit and betrayal. "I can't, Bronwyn," I said, my voice flat. "I can't forgive you, it's over." Bronwyn's face crumpled and she sank to her knees, her body racked with sobs. But I felt nothing. No pity, no compassion, no love. Just a cold, empty void where my heart used to be. I walked away from Bronwyn, from our brownstone, from our life together. I filed for divorce the next day. The process was long and painful, but I was determined to move on, to rebuild my life from the ashes of our shattered marriage. I moved into a small studio apartment in the Gold Coast, started seeing a therapist, and threw myself into my work. I reconnected with old friends, took up new hobbies, and slowly began to heal. It wasn't easy. There were days when the pain was overwhelming, when I couldn't stop thinking about Bronwyn and the betrayal. But I refused to let it consume me. I refused to let her actions define me. Several months after the divorce was finalized, I received a letter from Bronwyn. I hesitated before opening it, unsure if I was ready to face her again. But curiosity got the better of me. I opened the letter and began to read. In the letter, Bronwyn apologized for her actions, expressing remorse for the pain she had caused me. She wrote that she had realized the gravity of her mistake and that she was deeply sorry for betraying my trust. She revealed that her affair with Callum had been short-lived, and that he had ended things with her shortly after I discovered them. She claimed that he was only interested in using her for her connections in the art world, and that he had moved on to another artist shortly after dumping her. She also wrote that her career had suffered as a result of the scandal. Her exhibition had been canceled, and her reputation in the art world had been tarnished. She was struggling to find work and was facing financial difficulties. She ended the letter by asking for my forgiveness and wishing me well. I finished reading the letter, a strange mix of emotions swirling inside me. Part of me felt a sense of satisfaction, knowing that Bronwyn was suffering the consequences of her actions. But another part of me felt a pang of sadness, seeing the woman I had once loved reduced to such a state of despair. I thought about reaching out to her, offering her some comfort or support. But then I remembered the image of her in Callum's arms, the betrayal that had shattered my world. And I knew that I couldn't. I couldn't forgive her. Not yet. Maybe someday, but not today. I crumpled up the letter and threw it in the trash. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, exhaling the last vestiges of anger and resentment. It was time to move on, to focus on my own healing and happiness. I had learned a valuable lesson from this experience, a lesson about trust, betrayal, and the importance of self-respect. And I was determined to never let anyone treat me that way again. One evening, a few months later, I was at an art gallery opening in the West Loop when I saw her. Bronwyn. She looked thinner, her face gaunt, and her fiery red hair seemed dull and lifeless. She was standing alone in a corner, sipping a glass of wine, her eyes darting nervously around the room. I hesitated, unsure whether to approach her or not, but then our eyes met. A flicker of recognition crossed her face, followed by a look of shame and regret. She lowered her gaze and turned away. I watched her for a moment longer, a wave of conflicting emotions washing over me. Pity, sadness, anger, and a strange sense of closure. I realized that I no longer felt the burning resentment that had consumed me for so long. I had finally accepted what had happened, and I was ready to move on. I took a deep breath and walked towards her. "Bronwyn," I said softly, my voice calm and even. She looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. "Torin," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "How are you?" I asked, trying to sound genuinely concerned. I'm okay," she said, her voice trembling. "Things have been difficult." "I heard," I said, nodding. "I'm sorry, thank you," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I want you to know that I am truly sorry for what I did. I ruined everything." "I know," I said, my voice softening. "But it's okay, Bronwyn, it's over. We can't change the past. All we can do is learn from it." She looked at me, her eyes searching mine. Have you moved on?" she asked. "Yes, I have," I said, smiling gently. "I'm happy, Bronwyn. I'm finally at peace." A look of relief washed over her face. "I'm glad," she said. "I'm truly glad." We stood in silence for a moment, a strange sense of understanding passing between us. Then I smiled and said, "Well, I should get going. It was good to see you, Bronwyn." "You too, Torin," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. I turned and walked away, leaving Bronwyn standing alone in the corner. I didn't look back. I knew that I had finally closed that chapter of my life. I had forgiven her, not for her sake, but for my own, and I was finally free. I walked through the gallery, admiring the artwork, my heart filled with a sense of hope and optimism. The rain had stopped, and the sun was beginning to peek through the clouds, casting a golden glow over the city. I smiled, knowing that the future was bright and that I was ready to embrace it. That night, I went home and started working on a new design project, a project that reflected my newfound sense of peace and purpose. As I worked, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the experiences I had been through, both the good and the bad. They had made me who I am today, a stronger, wiser, and more compassionate person. And for that I was truly grateful. Life had thrown me a curveball, a devastating betrayal that had shattered my world. But I had survived. I had healed. And I had emerged stronger than ever before. And as I looked out the window at the twinkling lights of the city, I knew that everything was going to be okay. I was finally free. Years passed. I continued to work as a graphic designer, building a successful career and finding fulfillment in my creative pursuits. I dated, but I was cautious, guarded, determined not to repeat the mistakes of the past. I eventually met someone special, a kind, intelligent, and compassionate woman named Isolde who shared my values and my love of art and culture. We fell in love, slowly and deeply, and built a strong and lasting relationship based on trust, respect, and mutual admiration. One day, I received an email from Bronwyn. She wrote that she had moved to Santa Fe, New Mexico, and was working as an art teacher at a local school. She had found peace and contentment in her new life and was finally happy. She also wrote that she had remarried and had a young daughter. She sent me a photo of her, her husband, and her daughter, all smiling and happy. I looked at the photo, a sense of warmth spreading through my chest. I was happy for her. She had found her own path to happiness just as I had found mine. The past was behind us and we were both moving forward, living our lives to the fullest. I replied to her email, wishing her well and congratulating her on her new family. I closed the email, a sense of completion washing over me. The final chapter of our story had been written, and it had a happy ending. Not the ending I had expected, but an ending nonetheless. And as I sat there, reflecting on the journey of my life, I realized that betrayal, while painful and devastating, can also be a catalyst for growth and transformation. It can force us to confront our vulnerabilities, to reevaluate our priorities, and to emerge stronger and more resilient than ever before. It can teach us the true meaning of love, trust, and self-respect. And it can ultimately lead us to a place of greater peace, happiness, and fulfillment. So, If you are reading this and have experienced betrayal in your own life, know that you are not alone. Know that it is possible to heal, to move on, and to find happiness again. It may take time, effort, and courage, but it is worth it. Because on the other side of betrayal lies the opportunity to create a life that is even more beautiful, meaningful, and fulfilling than you ever thought possible. Just remember to always trust your gut, be true to yourself, and never settle for anything less than you deserve. Your happiness is worth fighting for, and you are capable of overcoming any obstacle that life throws your way. Never forget that. And remember, while forgiveness is a virtue, it's also a gift you give yourself. It doesn't excuse the actions of others, but it frees you from the burden of resentment and allows you to move forward with a lighter heart and a brighter future. So forgive if you can, but never forget the lessons you've learned along the way. They will guide you, protect you, and help you create a life that is filled with love, joy, and fulfillment. Betrayal's Echo, From Heartbreak to Healing, is a tale of love, loss, and resilience. Torin, a graphic designer from Chicago, faces the ultimate betrayal when he discovers his wife, Bronwyn, with another man. This story explores the depths of heartbreak, the struggle to forgive, and the journey to rebuild a life shattered by infidelity. It's about finding strength in the face of adversity and discovering that healing is possible, even after the most profound betrayals. For those who have ever felt the sting of betrayal, this story offers a message of hope and the promise of a brighter future.